Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Raise the Age Training Technical Assistance Center, Services and Supports Available to States. My name is Carissa Rano, and I'm with OJJDP's National Training Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few of the features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. For those of you wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, you may do so by locating the Handouts pod directly above the chat area. Click on the name of the file and then click the Download button. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenters will address some of your questions posed during the presentation. Please type your questions in the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a moment to help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything into the chat pod at this time. Following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. This is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and is sent via an Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye on your email for your certificates. Finally, this event will be archived in approximately 3 weeks on OJJDP's online university at www.ojjdpou.org, where you can also find additional resources and view past webinars. Again, thank you for joining us today. I will now turn it over to Katie Penkoff to begin today's webinar.
Thank you, Carissa. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. As Carissa said, my name is Katie Penkoff, and I am the Project Director for the Raise the Age Training and Technical Assistance Center. I will also serve as the moderator for today's webinar. Please note that today's presentation and the related handouts, as Carissa stated, are available for download in the handout pod. Throughout the webinar, please place your questions in the chat box, and we will address them at the end of our presentation during the question and answer session. We are fortunate to have a few members of the Raise the Age Training and Technical Assistance Center team with us today. I would like to briefly introduce each of them and their role on the project. We have Dr. Roger Jarjora, who serves as our principal investigator, Dr. Lisa Hutchinson, who serves as our training and technical assistance specialist, Mr. Conrad Haight, who serves as our data analyst, and Mr. Femi Fide, who is our research assistant. I will now turn the presentation over to Roger, who will share more about today's webinar and the center.
Okay, thanks, Katie. So I'll give you just a quick sort of preview of what we plan to accomplish today on the webinar. So this is the first in a series of webinars that we are going to be hosting from the TTA Center. And today's webinar is designed to introduce you to the center. So you're going to learn about the Raise the Age Training and Technical Assistance Center and what the purpose it serves and how to access services through the center. We'll also be talking about the process that you can go through to submit requests to receive training and technical assistance from the center itself. The Raise the Age Training and Technical Assistance Center is funded by OJJDP. We on a cooperative agreement. We are part of the Smart on Juvenile Justice initiative, and that's a series of projects that are designed to take what is sort of a building body of evidence-based practices and high-quality research that really shows strategies that we can apply in the juvenile justice system to lead to system change that also can be done with, at a responsible cost management and, without the risk of, risks to public safety or changing the number of, raising the number of kids that end up in the system. The American Institutes for Research, our organization, is the host of the Training and Technical Assistance Center, and we are designed to provide services to states that have not yet changed the age of criminal responsibility to 18. So 7 states that still have the age of criminal responsibility set under 18 are the ones that are eligible to put in requests for training and technical assistance. So that includes the states that you see here on the slide: Georgia, Michigan, Missouri, New York, North Carolina, Texas, and Wisconsin. Our center is set up to provide assistance to those states in preparation for changing the law in the states. So we can provide assistance that helps to set the stage in your state to make those changes. Because we're funded by OJJDP, we can't ourselves be involved in any lobbying efforts or influencing the legislation, but we can assist in many ways to get the tools together that you need in order to make those changes in your state. So our mission and the goal is to provide research and data that is useful to make informed decisions about the policies that you have in place.
Okay, this is Katie, and we'd like you to please take a moment or two to complete the poll question. When do you think your state will most likely raise the age of criminal responsibility? Okay, thank you so much for weighing in. It looks like people still are. We understand that many of your states are currently in the middle of legislative sessions where raise the age bills are under consideration. So we look forward to learning how we can assist in the process of finding the research and data you need in order to make informed decisions and move your efforts forward. Okay. So at the Raise the Age Training and Technical Assistance Center, we are employing a 3-pronged approach to the provision of training and technical assistance. The first prong of the approach is to prepare a report addressing the capacity and feasibility for raising the age of criminal responsibility to 18 for interested states. As Roger mentioned, the second prong of the approach is the development of a high-quality webinar series utilizing experts from states that are in various stages of their reform efforts, from recently passed legislation to several years post-implementation. And in recognition of the excellent work already in progress and the resources that are already available in scattered places across the web, the third and final prong of our approach is to create a more formalized online community of practice among the 7 states currently engaged in reform efforts. Each of these prongs will be discussed in more detail as we progress throughout today's presentation. Under the first prong of our approach, we will work with stakeholders within interested states to analyze arrest and disposition patterns for youth through age 17, assess the capacity of their juvenile justice systems to absorb youth through age 17, and then forecast the implications of that policy change on states' juvenile justice systems, criminal justice systems, and the state overall. Here you see a training and technical assistance request and review process slide. We discussed the training and technical assistance process here for a few reasons. First, from our research, we have learned that many of the states have already engaged in some type of report preparation and thus may not need assistance in all 3 areas of analyzing arrest and disposition patterns, assessing capacity, and forecasting implications. So during the initial assessment call, we will seek to learn from stakeholders what information states already have in place as well as what information is still needed. And then collectively, the stakeholders and our center staff will decide upon the report elements that the Raise the Age Training and Technical Assistance Center will work with the state to address. The agreed upon elements will serve as the basis for an information sharing agreement or memorandum of understanding between the state and the American Institutes for Research. Secondly, we discuss the process here to ensure that when a request is submitted, it is made in partnership with stakeholders within your state who have access to the information and data needed for the resulting analyses. This will include juvenile and adult criminal justice system data as well as related expenditures. In the Community Stakeholders Guide, which has been reloaded to the handout pod, a list of possible stakeholders you may wish to include in your efforts is listed on page 2. And so these are folks who will help make key decisions to guide the process, provide access to data, and assist interpreting the results of the report. We will go over the request process in greater detail later in the webinar, and I will now turn the presentation over to Conrad, who will share more about prong 1 of our approach.
Good morning, everyone. If it is determined that states need assistance analyzing their arrest and disposition patterns for youth through age 17, we will work with the stakeholders within the state to identify the juvenile and criminal justice system data needed, as well as any existing data sources and other possible avenues for obtaining the required information. We recognize that some states have more sophisticated and integrated justice information systems than others. Thus, we will work with states to explore the data that is readily available and to brainstorm ways to obtain the data that is not as easily accessible. This process could entail assisting states in creating the mechanisms for collecting the data. An example of this is designing an online survey to collect arrest data from counties using REDCap, a secure web application for building and managing online surveys and databases. A detailed explanation of the data needed for each referral or arrest is provided in the data manual. To assess the capacity of states' juvenile justice systems to absorb the majority of youth through age 17, we will work with states to explore trends in juvenile delinquency, as well as the current usage and overall capacity of their juvenile justice systems. This process will entail understanding and mapping states' existing juvenile and criminal justice system case processing, relevant state statutes, diversion programs, and other avenues for steering individuals away from court involvement, pretrial confinement, probation and parole supervision, community-based services, and post-disposition placements. The purpose of identifying and exploring the current usage and overall capacity of these system elements is to provide states with the research and data needed to address any questions or concerns they might have about their ability to effectively serve an increased number of youth in their juvenile justice system. Through the training and technical assistance request assessment process, we will work with states to identify the system points for which there are concerns about capacity. The resulting assessment will focus on obtaining the research and data needed to address these specific concerns. We will guide states through a process of mapping the 3 stages, i.e. investigation and intake, adjudication, and disposition, within their juvenile justice systems, and the decisions and system elements that come into play within each of its 9 contact points, from arrest through transfer to adult court. For each of the stages and contact points, we will work with the state to understand the system elements involved, assess their usage, determine their capacity, and learn the associated costs. As noted in their Raise the Age, Shifting to a Safer and More Effective Juvenile Justice System report, the Justice Policy Institute describes how states who have either recently raised their age of criminal responsibility or who are in the process of exploring the feasibility of doing so have already begun reallocating resources within their systems. As the authors describe, through expanding the use of diversion, making probation and aftercare approaches more effective, addressing young people's mental health needs outside of the deep end of the system, reducing the use of pretrial detention, reducing reliance on facilities and focusing resources on community-based approaches, keeping young people safe by complying with the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and improving juvenile justice systems management of resources and strengthening strategies to serve youth more effectively, states have incrementally increased their capacity to absorb youth through age 17. Thus, in addition to mapping how cases currently flow through the 3 stages and 9 contact points of the juvenile justice system, assessing the current usage of the system's elements and determining the system's overall capacity, we will work with states to understand what steps, in line with these 7 strategies, they have already taken to improve their responses to juvenile justice and delinquency prevention. The RTA TTA Center will be collaborating with the Justice Policy Institute and the Campaign for Youth Justice for our 2nd webinar in this series on raising the age of criminal responsibility, lessons learned from states who have undertaken similar policy shifts. At that time, we will learn more about these 7 strategies or steps that states have taken to improve their approach to juvenile justice. When attempting to forecast the implications of raising the age of criminal responsibility, understanding the costs and benefits of the policy change are among the most commonly voiced concerns. Thus, the RTA TTA Center will work with states to develop an estimate of the direct and indirect costs that will likely be incurred and the direct and indirect benefits that will likely be accrued from this policy change. This process will entail working in collaboration with state stakeholders to conduct a cost-benefit analysis. We will guide states through the 6-step process articulated by the Cost-Benefit Analysis Unit of the Vera Institute of Justice in their Cost-Benefit Analysis and Justice Policy Toolkit. These steps include identifying the investment's potential impact on public safety, cost savings, and youth outcomes, quantifying the investment's impacts, determining marginal costs, calculating costs, benefits, and net value, testing the assumptions, and reporting the results.
Thank you, Conrad. Please, at this moment, take a moment or 2 to answer our 2nd poll question. How long has your state been trying to raise the age? Right, as we can see from the results coming in, it has taken most states quite a few years to explore the possibility of implementing this reform. Thus, we hope we can be of assistance in this process and support states' efforts. I will now turn the presentation over to Lisa.
Thank you, Katie. So I just want to share a little bit about the requesting the TTA process for this 2nd prong of the approach. And as you can see, we as an OJJDP funded training and technical assistance, all the requests for training and technical assistance, or as we like to call it, TTA, from the Raise the Age Training and Technical Assistance Center should be made through TTA 360. And as described on the OJJDP TTA 360 website, this is a centralized TTA request system that allows you to submit a request to any of the OJJDP providers, create and manage your own account, and view progress on your request in real time. As noted in the frequently asked questions on the TTA 360 website, although some OJJDP TTA providers have special eligibility requirements, such as our center, any organization that provides juvenile justice, delinquency prevention, or related services may create a TTA 360 account and submit a TTA request. You do not have to be an OJJDP grantee to request TTA through TTA 360. However, as mentioned earlier, in order to qualify for assistance from our TTA Center, you must be from one of the 7 states Roger identified earlier in the presentation. I also want to let you know that in addition to completing the TTA 360 request form, individuals and organizations seeking training and technical assistance from the Raise the Age TTA Center will be asked to answer a number of supplemental questions. These questions are designed to assist our staff in learning more about the state's Raise the Age efforts to date and the readiness to engage in the training and technical assistance we are offering. Requesters are asked to answer these questions in a separate Word document and upload that document to the TTA 360 request. More information about TTA 360 and the request process can be found in the Community Stakeholders Guide, and the TTA 360 system can be accessed via the following link, as you see on the screen. The next slide shows you a little bit about, it's a screenshot of the TTA 360 opening page, and there's two ways. In the right-hand corner you'll see there's two ways you can request TTA. You can go ahead and create an account, or you can go ahead and ask to submit a request, and it will generate an account for you. It is a very brief process, so it's just really quick to create that account, and you will need to do so in order to submit your request. The other thing I wanted to say that is if the states, in the 7 identified states, if you are experiencing any difficulty in accessing the system, or you want some additional assistance in uploading your information and making sure that you have all the requisite information, we are going to be able to help you with that. So don't worry, this is not a lengthy process. It'll be an easy process. And like I mentioned, you can easily reach out to us and we will help you through this process. The next thing I wanted to do was give you a little bit of information about once that TTA request is received, what our process here at the Raise the Age TTA Center is for processing that request. So once a request is submitted by a state via TTA 360 and reviewed by the Raise the Age Training and Technical Assistance Center, an assessment call will be scheduled with the requester to learn more about the request, the work that has already been done in the state related to exploring the possibility of raising the age of criminal responsibility, understand the analyses that are still needed in support of the Raise the Age efforts, and the information that the state would like our center to assist in addressing. The request is then discussed with the RTA TTA Center's OJJDP Program Officer for approval to proceed. After receiving approval, the RTA TTA Center will work with the requester to draft a Memorandum of Understanding or Information Sharing Agreement to identify the responsibilities of all parties and specify data collection, sharing, management, security, quality control, and the governance procedures. If needed, we will also be happy to provide assistance to interested states in completing the request process. Some of the requested information we will ask at the time of the submission of your TTA request, and other information will be collected at the time of our initial assessment call. The second prong of our approach is the development of a high-quality webinar series utilizing experts from states who are in the various stages of their reform efforts. We are bringing together the best thinking on the issues and challenges states commonly encounter when seeking to raise the age of criminal responsibility. The webinars will be recorded and serve as a lasting resource for states who are working toward reform. Following the webinars, the recordings will be housed on OJJDP's online university for sustainability and wider public access. We have pre-planned the first two webinars, today's webinar, and the previously mentioned Raising the Age of Criminal Responsibility, lessons learned from states who have raised the age, that we will be collaborating with the Justice Policy Institute and the Campaign for Youth Justice to host. We did just schedule this webinar and wanted to let everybody know that the webinar will be held on Wednesday, May 10th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. In addition to these first two that we have pre-planned, we have developed some suggested topics for webinars 3 through 5 that you can see here on the screen. The third one, Understanding the Real-Life Impact, Youth and Family Voice. In this webinar, we want to seek to engage a youth and family member who have been impacted by an age of criminal responsibility set under 18 to share their experiences.
The fourth suggested topic, raising public awareness about the age of criminal responsibility and its impact within your state. In this one, we are choosing to focus on raising awareness of the age of criminal responsibility and its impact within your state, as well as having the information and data available to address commonly held myths about raise the age. The final proposed topic for the fifth webinar would be taking stock of the future of raise the age efforts within the state. And in addition to reflecting on the status of state reform efforts, in this webinar, we would like to include ideas for creating mechanisms to monitor and capture the impacts, such as youth outcomes, spending, savings, etc., of states who have raised the age. Please know that we just proposed the topics for webinars 3 through 5 as suggestions. We absolutely want to hear from each of you on this webinar about what you believe would be the most pressing and relevant topics that we should address in our webinar series. So please think about that and share your thoughts in the chat box. Also, if you have any questions or want to share those, that information further, please do so when we wrap up in our our Q&A session. We really do want to hear your suggestions. And with that, I'm going to now turn the presentation over to Femi, who will provide information on our third prong of the approach, the online community of practice. Femi?
Thank you so much, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. The third prong of the Raising the Age Technical Assistance Center is the online community of practice, which will provide members with the opportunity to engage in open dialogue about Raise the Age efforts, connect with stakeholders in 7 states working on raising the age, connect with national organizations supporting raising the age efforts, connecting with states who have successfully raised the age, utilize the Information Hub and Central Repository, examine methods for analyzing arrest data and disposition patterns, and forecasting the implications of policy changes. On your screen is a screenshot of the Online Community of Practice homepage. We hope that you will join the Online Community of Practice and become an active member. To join the Online Community of Practice, please send an email to RTA TTA at AAR.org. You will then receive an email from our admin user with an invitation to join, with a unique username and temporary password designated for your account. Back to you, Katie.
Thank you so much, Femi. Today, really, our goal was to, again, introduce you to who we are, to the services that we provide, and to encourage you to apply for training and technical assistance. Thus, we've gone over the training and technical assistance process, the webinars, and the online community of practice. And as Femi mentioned, we really hope that you will consider joining that online community of practice. We want to create an ongoing conversation with all of us about this process and try to support each other as best as possible. We now hope to address questions that you may have about any aspect of the Raise the Age Training and Technical Assistance Center and our three-pronged approach. So if you haven't already, please enter questions in the chat box, and then we will read those aloud and assign them to one of our presenters who are here today. Again, Roger, Lisa, Conrad, and Femi, who all oversee different aspects of the project. So while we're waiting for questions to come in, the reason why we had a number of our team on the presentation today was to really introduce you to them and get a feel for their roles on the project so that when you do reach out for training and technical assistance, you're familiar with who we are and who will be helping with various aspects of the training and technical assistance process. And so thank you to Roger, Lisa, Conrad, and Femi for being on today. We still see folks joining. We were thrilled to see the number of folks registering. Okay. So Dennis has a question here. I have heard that many states experience a lower level of actual 17-year-olds than projected. Any ideas what happens in this particular scenario? Roger, do you want to speak to this question, please?
Okay, sure. So I think what the states have found that have taken a look at this this question after changing is that, there are a number of strategies that are used in the juvenile justice system that involve diverting kids from the formal court process before it gets that far. And so it looks like states that have had the best success in making the change have also at the same time really taken a look at these practices and incorporated those into their practices as well too. And so there are just fewer of those strategies available or implemented at the adult system than happen in the juvenile system.
Okay. Thank you, Roger. Also, in the most recently released, just earlier, actually within March, the Justice Policy Institute, that's the publication we referenced earlier, put out a publication related to raising the age. And in that, they talk about the raise the age effect and how many of the states, as you've mentioned, received lower than anticipated referrals for 17-year-olds within their system. And that also speaks to Ken's question, is where can I find the costs for states that have chosen to raise the age? In that Justice Policy publication, they do provide a nice overview of what the anticipated costs were in addition to what the costs actually were. And in many cases, the costs either remained the same or were reduced over the time since Raise the Age legislation had been implemented. So in addition to that Justice Policy Institute report, on our online community of practice, you will find several reports that were conducted by states around this process. You will also find a link to Raise the Age Connecticut. The Toe Foundation, in addition with stakeholders within the state, maintain that website to share the lessons learned from Connecticut's raising the age legislation and the implementation of that legislation. And on the site, they talk about the costs that were associated with that. So those are some responses to the questions that have been posed so far. Okay, so it looks like Kimberly has a question. It says, while we wait for the May 10th webinar, do you have any lessons learned materials developed and outcome-based analysis that exceeded forecasted benefits in the states that implemented Raise the Age? Again, here I would point to that Justice Policy Institute publication, and from the PowerPoint that's in the handout pod, which is a copy of course, today's PowerPoint, you will actually find a link to that Justice Policy Institute report. It does a fantastic job of going through the different lessons learned by states who have already implemented Raise the Age legislation. And again, that Raise the Age Connecticut website has information on lessons learned. And some of that information is who are the most impactful messengers to share the Raise the Age message, and what have been the most effective messages to articulate to stakeholders within the states about why Raise the Age legislation is important. Okay. So let's see here. We have another question. Do you have any data, let me pull this over here, on the costs and effects of RTA in other states, and in particular Mississippi? That is something that we will be working to compile, and hopefully something I'd have to look back to the JPI report to see if it is in fact covered within that. But yes, Mississippi is something we are looking to learn more information about in terms of the costs and the effects of the Raise the Age legislation. Lisa, do you have any thoughts? I know you have worked closely with Mississippi.
I don't. I think the reports that you pointed to, Katie, would be really a good eye-opener and a good basis of information. And like you said, that is one of the areas we do want to look into. But I think those reports that you referenced are the best resource right now.
Okay. The next question is, New York and North Carolina are the only two states left in the country that automatically charges 16-year-olds as adults. While both are pressing forward with Raise the Age legislation, is there any additional pressure that OJJDP and the Raise the Age Training and Technical Assistance Center could provide for legislators in both states, especially in addressing non-scientific or fear-mongering statements against Raise the Age? As I mentioned previously, we are prohibited from engaging in any type of activity that could be considered lobbying. So our goal really to address non-scientific or fear-based statements would be to really help states fill in any gaps with information or research that may be needed to address those fears or concerns. Roger, would you have anything to add to that?
So the only other thing that I would say, so one of our hopes especially with the community of practice and even the webinar series, is to connect folks with people who are not prohibited from helping in that way, right? And so there are folks out there, and so I think this is where lessons can be learned from the states that have already moved across the line that I think you can learn. And so our hope is to try to connect you with those people and those insights too, and let that become part of the discussion that happens on the community of practice.
Right. Okay, our next question is, did states that have raised the age have many issues with a big influx of cases into the family court? Our big concern here would be not enough juvenile justice detention beds. Was that a big problem? And in fact, as the JPI or Justice Policy Institute report notes, that hasn't been a problem in states who have raised the age because they were already taking steps to reform their juvenile justice system, things like the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, providing community-based services. So they had already begun reallocating resources within their juvenile justice systems. So as youth who were 16 or 17 were absorbed into the juvenile justice system, they did have the capacity to serve them. So from what we understand and the data we've seen, that has not been a problem in terms of not enough capacity within the juvenile justice system to absorb those older youth. And part of our process for states who apply for prong one of our approach is really to help you look at your juvenile justice system capacity. What is your current usage of your juvenile detention and juvenile corrections and community-based services and facilities, and what is their overall capacity, and then anticipating, through looking at arrest and disposition patterns, how many youth would be absorbed within the system. So thankfully, that has not been seen as an issue in current raise the age states. Does Conrad or Lisa or Roger and Femi, anything to add to that? Okay. Sounds like we've addressed that question. Okay, so the next question we have here is that I've heard that raise the age has an unintended outcome of increasing the certification of many youth, California being one example. Can you speak to this? Roger, can you speak to this?
So I cannot speak to this. I don't. So California is not an example of a state that recently raised the age, actually. But that doesn't mean that this didn't. We have gone through periods of time where certifying kids or waiving kids to the adult court has increased, and then and gone the other direction too. So yeah, I'm not aware in this moment of a good answer to that question. It is something that we could take a look at though and see if there isn't evidence out there that we could bring to this community to let you know about.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Our next question is, when a bill is passed and we begin implementation, so in parentheses here, having already projected impact, what services do you provide that are the most helpful? Our scope of work currently focuses on working with states who have not yet passed legislation. And so unfortunately, our scope does not include working with states who are implementing already passed legislation. I think the most helpful thing that we might be able to do is connect you with other states and other stakeholders who have already implemented their policy change and can provide you with supports and maybe answers to your questions that you may have in that process.
So
Lisa?
Katie, if I could just add.
Yes, please.
So just one other thought on this. So what Katie said is correct. Now, it may be possible that in your state some of the the end result is contingent on certain things happening, right? So the legislation may pass, but there's certain things that have to happen for it to become in place and a reality. So under those circumstances, you might consider putting in a request for technical assistance and just making that clear, right? Help us understand how perhaps you still are eligible for support under, given where the state of, where things are with the legislation. And then, we would certainly consider any request that are made at that point.
Thank you, Roger. The next question is, beyond developing a report and analyzing data, can you clarify what kind of technical assistance is offered through the Raise the Age Training and Technical Assistance Center? So in that report process, or the preparation of that report, we walk through analyzing arrest and disposition pattern data with you. We map your juvenile and criminal justice system case flow to understand capacity and the associated costs. And then we work with you to really develop that report and help us interpret the results. And so Lisa is worked with many states over many years to engage in strategic planning. So really presenting what that report entails and talking about how that information might be used. Lisa, do you want to share a little bit about how you might work with states to engage in some strategic planning around that report?
Sure. As a part of the team, I will be involved in that process. Conrad, as a data analyst, will be heavily involved, as well as other team members in the process that Katie just identified. But really my role will be to take the lens and work with all the stakeholders involved and look at it in terms of how we're going to use that, what that's going to look like, how this report, the information, how the stakeholders are going to take that and then go to the requisite people and achieve the outcomes that we've identified. So I will be doing basically ongoing coaching with stakeholders throughout the data report process. We'll be doing strategic planning around what's the best way to use this information, who are the people that you need to get this information to, what format does it need to be in, and what do you really want to achieve with this information. So I will be working through that process with all of the key stakeholders. We'll meet regularly. We'll have that ongoing coaching through the data development process, data report development process, and then we will be engaging in strategic planning along the way to really strategically think through what we want to do and how we can use the great information that's going to be contained in that data report to achieve the things that you all want to achieve as stakeholders. So it will be an ongoing process, and I will be involved throughout that process and work with you to make sure that what you've identified, that we are able to work together to get that achieved.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So in addition to the strategic planning that's based upon the report and the report findings, of course, we have the webinar series and the online community of practice. And as we meet individually with states to engage in that initial kind of assessment call to understand what the needs are, there may be other needs related to Raise the Age efforts within your state that are identified at that time. So that's what's nice about the individualization process of prong one of our approach, is that we will work with states to really understand what those needs are and how we might best respond to those needs. Our next question.
Katie, can I?
Oh, yes, please, Roger.
I just want to add one thing. So the questions that we put out there were the things that we think we would do around a data, in terms of data, taking your data and then producing a report for you. Those questions came from, talking with folks in each of the states earlier this year. Once this project started. So there may be other questions that are important in your specific context. And those can certainly be posed, and then we could work with you to think about what's the right data that we could bring to bear to address that question. So we're not limited to just those questions. Those were the ones that we just learned were the most commonly needed questions to address in setting the foundation for raising the age.
Thank you, Roger. Our next question is, how have other states prepared their juvenile POs, or court counselors as they're called here in North Carolina? what was the time span of these trainings in connection with the actual implementation of the law? And that's a great question, and that is something that we hope to speak to in webinar 2 that Lisa mentioned will be offered on May 10th, is to truly understand how states prepared the different system stakeholders involved for implementing the change. It's a great question, and then one that we can pose to the presenters who will be participating with us in that webinar. Roger, Lisa, Conrad, anything to add to that? Okay, and it does appear that in all of the Raise the Age states there was time built in from when the legislation was passed to when it was actually implemented to allow these types of questions and concerns to be addressed in a systematic way to make sure that states were ready for this process to unfold as smoothly as possible. The next question is, this seems to have an impact on our juvenile detention center population as well as duplication of services offered by juvenile and adult probation. Is this a common concern? It definitely is a common concern, and that's why the process involves looking at and mapping both the juvenile justice system caseflow as well as the criminal justice system caseflow, and involving stakeholders from both systems so there is that communication, and then collectively we can work together to figure out how duplication, any duplication can be removed or at least addressed, or a plan for addressing them. Roger, anything to add to that?
No.
Okay. The last question I see in our queue here is, how can we find out who from our state is on the webinar and who may be interested in working together? Will you connect people from the same states? And so I guess my question back to the participants is, would you want us to share who from your state was also on this webinar, in this presentation today? Maybe the best way to facilitate that process is through our online community of practice. So as Femi mentioned, you would go to RTA TTA at AIR.org and email us. Let us know that you would like to be a member of that online community of practice. And then you will be able to see, once you are part of that community of practice, who else from your state is interested in exploring issues related to Raise the Age. Perhaps that's the best way. Lisa, Roger, what do you think?
Katie, this is Lisa. I think that's a really good way to start. And as we receive requests from for assistance for TTA requests, and I think that would be something we will definitely work with the states to ensure that all stakeholders are involved, and that if we can reach out and know of other interested people in the state, that we can then link them as well through that TTA assessment process. I think that's another opportunity for us to engage all interested parties in the state.
Okay, thank you. And Allison, does that answer your question? Okay. All right. So at this point, if there are not any additional questions, we want to thank you for your time today. We want to just remind you and invite you to the second webinar in our series on May 10th. There will be a juvenile justice or a JuveJust announcement that will follow, and we can also use the registration list from today's webinar to send out information about the second webinar and how to register for it. And we really hope that you will consider submitting a request for training and technical assistance. And as Lisa said, our staff is here to guide you through that process. So we want to support you in your efforts. We applaud you for your work in the area. As we know, many of you have been at this for a number of years within your state. So thank you for your time, and I'm now going to turn it back over to Carissa, who will close out the webinar.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you to our presenters for a great discussion on this topic. We have just a few brief reminders. This webinar will be archived in OJJDP's online university in approximately 3 weeks. For more information, please contact Raise the Age Training Technical Assistance Center. You may also contact OJJDP or NTTAC TTA Help Desk by following the contact information on this slide. And again, thank you for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Right, and one last thing I forgot to mention is that using the the registration list, we will be sending out a webinar feedback form, and we really hope that you will provide us some feedback so we can continue to improve upon and build upon our webinars and the services that we provide through the center. Thank you, and have a great day, everyone.